The Duke's stepmother forced her to choose a bride, until he realized she was the perfect choice. The ballroom of Ashford Manor gleamed under the cold brilliance of crystal chandeliers, their prisms scattering light over polished marble floors and gilded moldings. The air was thick with perfumed whispers, a symphony of anticipation and judgment, as the cream of London society assembled to witness the seasonal debut of eligible young ladies. Amid the delicate rustle of silk skirts and the faint clink of silver teacups, a single figure moved with measured grace, yet carried the weight of quiet apprehension upon her shoulders. Lady Eleanor, cousin to the Duke of Ashford, had long navigated these corridors of elegance with poise and intelligence, but tonight, the scrutiny of the ton pressed upon her with uncommon severity. She entered the room with a subtle lift of her chin, her gown a modest confection of pale sapphire, adorned only with the slightest embroidery at the cuffs and neckline. The choice of color, deliberate in its restraint, marked her distinction without ostentation, yet in this hall of overt display, modesty often drew the sharpest whispers. Eleanor's eyes, observant and steady, flicked to the clusters of society matrons who had assembled near the dais, their jeweled fans snapping open and closed like the wings of predatory birds. Among them, Lady Marguerite, a recent widow of considerable influence and notorious venom, tilted her head and allowed a smile to spread, a smile meant neither for warmth nor amusement, but for calculated derision. "It appears Miss Eleanor has accepted the task of guiding the Duke himself," Lady Marguerite's voice trilled over the soft accompaniment of a string quartet, pitched for the benefit of all within earshot. The words carried easily, a blade wrapped in velvet. One wonders if she will do so with the subtlety that such a delicate role demands, or if the poor girl's own limitations will betray her. Eleanor felt the sting immediately, though she masked it beneath a composed countenance. Her lips pressed together in a line, not in anger but in discipline, for she knew well the eyes of the room were upon her, and every flicker of resentment would be dissected and repeated before the night was done. She could not afford the luxury of private indignation. The arena of the ton allowed only the perception of perfection. Her attention, however, was drawn beyond whispered insults to the figure standing near the grand staircase. The Duke of Ashford, a man of 24 years, radiated calm authority and refined charm, as though the weight of expectation and estate had sculpted him into a monument of propriety. His dark hair was carefully coiffed, his navy tailcoat pressed to perfection, and a subtle air of detachment surrounded him, the kind that invited curiosity rather than approach. Eleanor had known him in the familial sense, a cousin whose presence was familiar but distant, yet tonight she observed him anew, measuring the subtle tension beneath his polite smile. The Duke's stepmother, the formidable Duchess of Ashford, hovered nearby like a hawk surveying its prey. Her gown, a daring shade of crimson designed to command attention, swept the floor in a deliberate parade of influence. Her eyes, sharp and calculating, found Eleanor immediately. The assignment she had set before her cousin, a task cloaked in civility, was in fact a test of both skill and compliance. Eleanor was to guide the Duke in the selection of a bride, to navigate the intricate labyrinth of the ton's eligible daughters and determine which would best secure the family's wealth, influence, and social ascendancy. The stepmother's expectations were clear. This was a duty of no minor consequence, and failure would carry social consequences as precise and unforgiving as the ticking of a gilded clock. Eleanor inhaled slowly, steadying herself. She had anticipated discomfort, certainly, but the immediacy of judgment, the subtle barbs disguised as casual commentary, pressed upon her more keenly than she had imagined. And yet, even in this crucible of scrutiny, she found her mind sharpened, her senses attuned to the nuances of behavior and intent. Every glance, every turn of the head, every half-smile or slight frown revealed more than words ever could. Eleanor's own advantage, she understood, was in observation, in quiet intelligence, in the ability to perceive character where others perceived only wealth or display. The string quartet struck a lively measure, and with the music came the first dance of the evening. Debutantes, their gowns glimmering like polished gemstones, floated toward eligible partners, their movements as precise as clockwork. Eleanor, summoned by her stepmother's subtle nod, approached the Duke. Her hand, delicate and steady, brushed his arm as she gestured toward the central dance floor. A ripple of whispered approval, or disapproval, passed through the audience. The Duke's eyes, dark and assessing, met hers, and in that instant, the faintest spark of curiosity, almost imperceptible to any other, passed between them. "You will find it quite the challenge, cousin," he murmured, voice low and measured, audible only to her. "The ton does not often reward discretion, and yet that is precisely what it requires." Eleanor inclined her head slightly, a modest acknowledgement of both the challenge and the implicit compliment. "Indeed, my lord," she replied, her tone formal, yet layered with subtle warmth. "It is a delicate endeavor, to discern character beneath the trappings of fashion and fortune. Yet one must try or else be governed entirely by appearances." The Duke's faint smile, a curl at the corner of his lips, was the only sign that her words resonated beyond their civility. Still, the room remained a theater of observation, and Eleanor's awareness did not waver. As they moved through the crowd, introducing potential candidates for the Duke's consideration, she felt the weight of her responsibility press upon her. Each nod, each measured word could tilt opinion, could shape opportunity, could secure or ruin reputation. It was during this careful navigation that Lady Marguerite returned, her gaze slicing across the room with predatory precision. She approached Eleanor with a slow, deliberate smile. "And how fares our young guide?" she asked, voice honeyed but sharp. "Does she manage the Duke with sufficient tact, or does the burden prove too great?" Eleanor met the gaze steadily, offering the smallest incline of acknowledgement, neither shrinking nor yielding. "I find the task engaging," she said, careful to temper pride with humility. "One learns much in the company of those whose judgment is keen." A ripple of laughter, restrained but pointed, echoed from the assembled matrons. Eleanor felt the familiar heat of shame prick at her cheeks, but she held firm, meeting the gaze of the Duke, whose eyes, now shadowed with something unspoken, offered a silent shield against the room's judgment. As the first hour of the evening drew to a close, Eleanor retreated momentarily to the gallery overlooking the grand hall, allowing the swirl of candlelight and crystal to wash over her in a private exhale. Here, beyond the whispers and prying eyes, she could measure her own composure against the tide of expectation. The Duke joined her silently, standing slightly behind, not imposing, merely present. "You endure remarkably," he said quietly. "Many would falter under such scrutiny. You, however, command it without surrendering yourself." Eleanor turned, a faint, almost imperceptible relief passing through her expression. "One must navigate carefully," she said. "Society rewards those who appear unshaken, even when the heart trembles." The Duke's gaze lingered on her, assessing, admiring, and perhaps understanding more than propriety permitted him to speak aloud. In that shared silence, the first threads of connection began to weave themselves, subtle yet unbreakable, forged not in flamboyant gestures, but in quiet acknowledgement of strength, intelligence, and dignity under the relentless glare of expectation. And so, as the candles flickered and the music swelled once more, Eleanor returned to her place among the observers, the architect of guidance she had been tasked to become, fully aware that the trials of the evening were only the beginning. The whispers of the Tun, the ambitions of her stepmother, and the calculating eyes of Lady Marguerite all loomed on the horizon, yet in that precarious moment she possessed a quiet certainty: she would not be undone. The game had begun, and she, with all her grace and intelligence, was ready to play. The dawn of the next week found London shrouded in a delicate mist, the Thames weaving silvered patterns beneath the low-hanging clouds. Eleanor, rising before the household stirred, allowed herself a brief moment of solitude on the gallery balcony, the chill air pressing against her cheeks. The events of the previous evening lingered like shadows at the edge of her consciousness, yet she knew the theater of society would not pause for reflection. Each day promised fresh scrutiny, and she was tasked with preparing the Duke for encounters that were both a performance and a trial. The carriage ride to the Grosvenor Gardens gathering was a study in understated elegance. Eleanor's gown, a gentle shade of rose, fluttered in the wind as she settled beside the Duke, whose dark eyes scanned the horizon with practiced calculation. Though the morning was quiet, unspoken currents thrummed between them, each aware that the eyes of society measured not just manners, but the invisible alignment of wit and charm. The Duke's stepmother had spoken with veiled insistence the night before. He must select a bride swiftly, and Eleanor's guidance was to ensure that none of the suitable daughters of the Tun eluded his favor. Yet the task was far more intricate than a simple survey of appearances. Eleanor recognized that the richness of character often hid beneath the shimmer of silk and pearls, and she moved through the assembly with the patience of one who understood subtlety as power. She introduced the Duke to Lady Penelope, whose laughter rang with the hollow ring of vanity, and Miss Clarissa, whose eyes held intelligence but whose manner betrayed arrogance. Each assessment Eleanor made was deliberate, a careful balance between discretion and truth. A small token, seemingly trivial, soon became a conduit of connection. During a brief pause in the promenade, Eleanor presented the Duke with a folded note tucked into the pocket of his coat, a message composed in measured, discreet language. A reminder of his prior conversation with a particular candidate, a gentle correction to a misstep of etiquette. The gesture, imperceptible to any observer, was charged with a quiet intimacy. The Duke's hand brushed hers briefly as he accepted it, a spark almost imperceptible, yet sufficient to set the heart astir with unspoken acknowledgement. It was amidst these cautious maneuvers that scandal struck, not grand nor catastrophic, but the kind that fanned whispers into flames. Lady Marguerite, ever vigilant, had observed Eleanor's subtle influence and sought to undermine her. During a waltz, she arranged for a careless servant to drop a silver tray near Eleanor, drawing attention to a momentary lapse in grace. Laughter rippled through the assembly, delicate but sharp, aimed precisely at Eleanor. The Duke's gaze met hers instantly, dark and steady, an unspoken shield against the sting of public derision. He offered a subtle nod, a signal of quiet solidarity, and Eleanor, recovering with elegance, curtsied and continued, her composure unbroken yet her pulse quickened. Evening descended with a soft amber glow, the gardens alive with lanterns that cast flickering patterns on the cobblestones. Eleanor guided the Duke along the shaded paths, discussing subtle impressions and potential alliances with gentle observation. Each gesture of courtesy, each carefully phrased word, was a note in a larger symphony, one that Eleanor conducted with precise skill. She found satisfaction in the Duke's attentiveness, the way he absorbed her counsel without presumption, yet with appreciation that did not require verbal acknowledgement. It was in the quiet of a secluded arbor, hidden by climbing roses and lantern-lit trellises, that the first truly personal token was exchanged. Eleanor, with deliberate care, handed the Duke a pressed flower, its petals soft with the memory of morning dew. The gesture, simple to the casual observer, carried layers of meaning, attention, thought, and a shared acknowledgement of a moment apart from society's scrutinizing gaze. The Duke held it between his fingers, the faintest curl of a smile betraying a depth of feeling restrained by decorum. Yet the stability of these small intimacies was immediately threatened by society's ever-watchful eyes. A rival, Miss Clarissa, seized upon the proximity of Eleanor and the Duke to insinuate impropriety. "It appears the Duke finds Miss Eleanor's company more agreeable than others might expect," she murmured, loud enough for nearby guests to hear, her tone perfumed with feigned innocence. A ripple of laughter followed, subtle but sharp. Eleanor, maintaining her composure, inclined her head in polite acknowledgement, while the Duke's eyes darkened with protective clarity. The tension between appearance and reality, between decorum and desire, thickened the air. Through the course of the evening, Eleanor observed not merely the candidates before her, but the society that surrounded them. She noted the fleeting glances, the whispered agreements, the subtle machinations designed to secure advantage or undermine rivals. Every interaction was a lesson, every faux pas an opportunity to guide the Duke with insight that went beyond superficial charm. The true skill lay in revealing character while remaining untouchable to scandal, a delicate equilibrium that Eleanor navigated with quiet brilliance. The Duke, in turn, revealed layers of himself. The night had fallen like a velvet curtain over Ashford Manor, the gardens awash in the gentle silver of a crescent moon. Rain had swept through earlier, leaving the stone pathways glistening and the scent of wet roses thick upon the air. Lanterns flickered in the hedgerows, casting delicate shadows that danced across the Duke's familiar terrace. Eleanor stepped lightly along the cobblestones, the hem of her gown brushing the wet stones, her thoughts restless despite the serene beauty that surrounded her. The evening had been another carefully measured performance. Introductions, dances, exchanges of subtle gestures and whispered evaluations. Now, in this quiet hour, the pretense of society's gaze lifted, and the truth of hearts could be dared, if only for a moment. The Duke approached, his coat damp at the edges from the lingering mist, yet his posture remained resolute, commanding the space between them without intrusion. Eleanor's pulse quickened as he stopped a mere pace behind her, the faint sound of his boots on stone echoing softly, like a muted drumbeat of expectation. "The gardens suit reflection," he said quietly, voice low and resonant, carrying warmth that had been absent in the formality of the ballroom. "And yet they cannot shield one from truths long avoided." Eleanor inhaled, gathering her composure. "Some truths," she murmured, "are too delicate to present to the world. They demand privacy, lest they be trampled by idle curiosity." Her gaze met his over her shoulder, eyes steady yet luminous with unspoken meaning. The Duke studied her intently, a slow appreciation in the dark lines of his features. There was a gravity in the way he observed her, as though the polished veneer of society had vanished and only the person remained. A breeze stirred the climbing roses overhead, and Eleanor shivered, whether from chill or anticipation she could not tell. "I have guided you through appearances," she admitted, her voice barely above the whisper of leaves, "but in so doing, I have hidden my own heart. I am aware of its inclinations, yet propriety forbids their acknowledgement." She paused, considering the weight of each carefully chosen word. "It is a curious position, is it not? To shape another's choices while denying one's own desires." The Duke's hand rose slightly, hesitant, as if to reach for her but restrained by the decorum of the moment. "You speak as though the very foundation of our society conspires against sincerity," he replied, voice threaded with restrained emotion. "Yet I find in your guidance something more than mere counsel. There is courage and a clarity of thought I have seen in few others. And yet," his eyes darkened with an intensity she had never witnessed, "I have noticed, as you must suspect, a subtler truth. You do not merely advise, you move me." Eleanor's breath caught, though she maintained the semblance of calm. Every whispered word, every infinitesimal motion, seemed magnified beneath the silvered lanterns. She had prepared for scrutiny, for evaluation, but not for confession, not from the Duke himself and not in this fragile intimacy. "I did not imagine," she said softly, "that my discretion, my attempts to navigate without faltering, would be observed so keenly. And yet I am not untroubled. There are consequences to every perception, every fleeting glance." He stepped closer, though still carefully respectful, the space between them charged with quiet electricity. "Consequences," he echoed, "are the currency of our lives in this world of appearances. But I find in your presence that the cost of restraint has become intolerable. If I speak, if I acknowledge what stirs within me, I risk scandal, but I cannot feign indifference any longer." The words lingered, not boastful, not brash, but deliberate, heavy with honesty. Eleanor felt the delicate tremor of hope, mingled with fear. She knew the stakes. Society would not forgive indiscretion lightly, and the stepmother's ambitions were sharp and unyielding. Yet in the Duke's gaze she discerned sincerity unalloyed by expectation. The careful, measured rhythm of the ton, the whispering matrons, the polite bowing, the veiled judgments, seemed a distant echo, irrelevant in this suspended reality. "I have guided you with care," Eleanor whispered, "and in that guidance, I feared my own heart might betray me. I dared not hope that you might perceive more than propriety. And yet here we stand, amid roses and mist, where masks are unnecessary. You see me as I am, and I cannot resist the confession that I have long concealed. I am moved by you." The Duke's response was measured, almost reverent, as if her words had opened a door previously sealed. "Lady Eleanor," he said, his tone trembling only imperceptibly, "I have watched your wisdom, your courage, and the quiet dignity with which you navigate every challenge. And in watching, I have found myself helpless to deny what I feel. You are incomparable, far beyond the considerations of fortune, rank, or convention. I am compelled, by every sense of reason and heart alike, to honor what lies between us." A soft wind rustled the leaves overhead, carrying with it the faint fragrance of roses and the promise of rain. Eleanor turned fully, allowing the moonlight to fall upon her face, revealing a tremor of vulnerability that contrasted with her habitual poise. "It is not merely admiration you offer, then," she said softly, "but acknowledgement of a truth both daring and dangerous. How are we to reconcile such feeling with the expectations that bind us?" The Duke's gaze softened, though the intensity remained, like a candle flame undimmed by shadow. "We shall proceed with caution," he replied, "but no longer with denial. The world may demand restraint, yet I will not hide my regard. In time, all that is hidden may be revealed, and the hearts that have remained silent too long may speak in their proper measure." A sudden sound, the distant carriage returning, or perhaps the faint murmur of the household, reminded them that the public world remained, indifferent to the revelation now shared. Eleanor inclined her head slightly, a quiet acknowledgement of the precarious path they now trod. "Then we must tread carefully," she said. "Yet perhaps the care lies not only in caution, but in the courage to embrace what is true." The Duke extended his hand, not as a gesture of formality, but as an offering of trust and partnership. Eleanor, after a moment of delicate hesitation, placed her hand within his, the contact light yet resonant with meaning. The token of connection, previously expressed in notes and flowers, was now embodied in touch and acknowledgement. For a long moment they stood thus, the gardens a cathedral of mist and moonlight around them, each heart attuned to the other, each soul daring to confront desire and propriety simultaneously. Eleanor's pulse gradually steadied, tempered by the realization that confession, once spoken, frees as much as it risks. The Duke's dark eyes, now warm and open, conveyed a silent pledge that the feelings awakened between them would not be denied, whatever obstacles society might place in their path. As the lanterns flickered and shadows deepened among the rose-clad trellises, Eleanor understood that the turning point had arrived. The private confession, delicate and fraught, had transformed both guidance and observation into recognition and mutual acknowledgement. And though the night promised further challenges, further scrutiny, the bond now forged in honesty and courage could no longer be undone. In the quiet embrace of moonlight and mist, two hearts had found a shared language, unspoken yet undeniable, a promise that would guide them toward what society might deem impossible, yet fate had decreed inevitable. The day of the grand ball arrived with a crispness in the air that spoke of winter's approach. Ashford Manor had been transformed into a glittering spectacle of candlelight and crystal, the chandeliers ablaze as if rivaling the stars themselves. Every surface gleamed with polish, every tapestry and gilded frame seemed to shimmer with anticipation. Society's finest had assembled, their whispers and laughter forming a delicate yet palpable hum, each guest keen to observe the evening's spectacles, alliances, flirtations, and the inevitable scrutiny of those whose hearts were most precariously engaged. Among them, Eleanor moved with the composed grace that had become her signature, her gown a soft shade of emerald that caught the candlelight and seemed to pulse with her restrained excitement. The Duke of Ashford watched her from across the hall, his presence commanding yet tempered by the quiet intensity that had long distinguished him. The events of the past weeks, the careful observation, the subtle tokens of connection, the private confession under the moonlit terrace, had drawn the contours of a bond neither had dared to name aloud, yet both had recognized with certainty. Tonight, amid the swirl of silk skirts and whispered commentaries, the weight of expectation pressed heavily upon them both. The stepmother's eyes, sharp and calculating, sought to steer the Duke toward a conventional match, her ambition as unrelenting as the firelight that danced across the high ceiling. Eleanor felt the familiar tension as she approached the center of the ballroom to offer guidance to the Duke in his introductions. Potential candidates moved with measured smiles, their conversations polished, their gestures rehearsed. Yet none of them stirred the Duke's attention, none of them sparked the awareness that Eleanor herself had long evoked in him. She noted the contrast between their studied elegance and the quiet authenticity he seemed to respond to in her presence, and a fragile hope settled within her chest. This hope was not naive, it was tempered by the knowledge of propriety, of the scrutiny that would follow any deviation from expectation. As the orchestra swelled into a waltz, Eleanor and the Duke found themselves near the center of the hall, their eyes meeting with a shared understanding. The hum of conversation and music seemed to fade into the periphery, leaving only the measured exchange between them. The Duke's hand, steady and deliberate, hovered briefly near hers, an invitation understood and accepted with the slightest inclination of her fingers. They moved together across the polished floor, a quiet symphony of motion that drew the attention of the room, yet revealed nothing of the private intensity between them. It was then, in a carefully orchestrated moment, that the stepmother attempted her final maneuver. She stepped forward, her voice a calculated blend of charm and command, presenting a young lady of considerable wealth and pedigree as the prospective bride. The assembly murmured in polite approval, yet Eleanor, standing beside the Duke, felt the quiet tension coil between them. The Duke's eyes darkened with determination, a subtle warning to all who sought to dictate his choice. Eleanor understood instantly. This was the moment when restraint must yield to courage. With a deliberate motion, the Duke turned to face the gathered guests, his voice carrying with a calm authority that silenced the room. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, each word measured yet imbued with unmistakable emotion, "I am grateful for the guidance and suggestions offered to me regarding a suitable match. Yet it is not fortune, rank, or superficial acclaim that dictates the heart. It is understanding, admiration, and respect that must guide such a choice." His gaze, unwavering, found Eleanor amidst the crowd. "Lady Eleanor has shown not only wisdom and insight, but courage, grace, and judgment beyond measure. It is she who has earned my regard, and it is to her alone that my heart inclines." A hush fell over the assembly. The stepmother's eyes widened in disbelief, her carefully constructed plans undone by the clarity of the Duke's declaration. Eleanor, for the first time in many weeks, allowed herself a faint exhale, her composure softened by relief and anticipation. The Duke, stepping closer, offered his hand in a formal yet intimate gesture, bridging the space between declaration and acceptance. "Your guidance has been my compass," the Duke continued, his voice lowering so that only she could hear, "and in observing your grace and wisdom, I have discovered the depth of my own heart. Will you consent to share both life and companionship with me, despite the strictures of society that would seek to divide us? Eleanor's eyes glistened, the moonlight from the terrace windows catching in the subtle sparkle of her lashes. Her voice, steady yet imbued with emotion, responded, "I have walked beside you in careful discretion, yet I have long hoped for this moment. I would be honored, my lord, to share both life and heart, if you will have me." The orchestra, sensing the conclusion of the evening's anticipation, swelled once more, and the first chords of a celebratory dance filled the room. Guests, initially silent in shock, gradually broke into applause, the murmurs of admiration and approval weaving through the hall. Even the most critical observers found themselves drawn to the authenticity and courage of the pair, unable to deny the resonance of true connection displayed so openly. The stepmother, though initially composed, retreated with a calculated grace, her ambitions thwarted but her dignity intact. Eleanor, her hand now firmly within the Duke's, allowed herself the smallest smile, a gesture invisible to all but him, a silent acknowledgement of shared triumph. The private victories, the careful navigation of scandal, and the courage to embrace what had long been unspoken now culminated in a union recognized by both heart and society. As the night progressed, the Duke and Eleanor moved together among the guests, each introduction and exchange illuminated by the knowledge of what had been won. The whispered assessments of others now seemed trivial against the depth of understanding that bound them. Every glance they shared carried history, promise, and the quiet satisfaction of hearts acknowledged and honored. Later, in the quiet of the newly adorned drawing room, away from the scrutiny of society, the Duke and Eleanor stood by the fire, the warmth and light enveloping them. He drew her gently closer, the formality of the evening giving way to private tenderness. "Tonight, we have navigated both the expectations of others and the truths of our hearts," he said softly, "and emerged not merely intact but united." Eleanor's fingers brushed his cheek, a delicate, intimate gesture, and she whispered, "We have endured scrutiny, temptation, and subtle manipulation, yet in the end propriety and courage have guided us to what is right." Their lips met briefly, a soft confirmation of love, trust, and shared triumph. In the quiet aftermath of the evening, as the guests departed and the manor settled into stillness, the Duke and Eleanor moved toward the path that would lead to their future. Each step was deliberate, each touch a promise, each glance a reaffirmation of the bond that had been forged through discretion, intelligence, and courage. Society had witnessed the declaration, scandal had been reconciled, and love had triumphed, not through recklessness, but through measured honesty and mutual respect. By candlelight, as the manor's doors closed upon the last departing carriage, Eleanor and the Duke stood side by side, gazing into one another's eyes. The world of expectations, whispers, and ambition had not vanished, yet it had been transformed into a landscape in which two hearts, once constrained by propriety, now moved freely together. In that moment, the culmination of weeks of observation, scandal, and private confession found its perfect expression. A promise of partnership, affection, and shared life, solidified in the grace and dignity that had always defined them both. The night drew on, and in the quiet corners of Ashford Manor, two souls intertwined in a harmony that surpassed social expectation, a union that would endure not merely in ceremony, but in the intimate, enduring recognition of love, respect, and unwavering connection. In the hearts of those who had watched, admiration and inspiration remained. In the hearts of Eleanor and the Duke, certainty and fulfillment prevailed. They had navigated a world of scrutiny and ambition, and emerged together, triumphant, their future a testament to the enduring power of courage, intelligence, and the delicate, unassailable beauty of true love.